He was born an outsider, mocked, underestimated, and nearly forgotten by history. Yet within 3 decades, one man would bend Europe to his will. Kings feared him, armies collapsed before him, and at his peak, Napoleon Bonaparte ruled more land than any European since the Roman Empire. But the same ambition that lifted him to the top of the world would also destroy everything he built. This is the story of Napoleon Bonaparte, the man who came closer than anyone to ruling the world and lost it all. Napoleon Bonaparte is one of the most extraordinary figures in human history. To some, he was a military genius who modernized Europe. To others, a ruthless dictator whose wars cost millions of lives. But beyond the myths and legends lies a far more complex story. A story of brilliance, obsession, loyalty, betrayal, and a man who believed destiny itself was on his side. Napoleon was born in 1769 on the island of Corsica, just months after it became part of France, a land torn between old loyalties and new rulers. Corsica was poor, isolated, and deeply suspicious of French rule. Napoleon grew up speaking Italian more fluently than French, and from an early age he felt caught between identities. He was Corsican by blood, French by law, and fully accepted by neither. At the age of 9, he was sent away to military school on the mainland, far from his family and homeland. There, he was an outsider in every sense. Other students mocked his accent, his manners, and his short stature. He struggled socially, preferring solitude over companionship. Teachers described him as quiet, intense, and unusually serious for his age. But while others laughed, Napoleon studied. He immersed himself in mathematics, artillery science, and military history. He read obsessively, absorbing lessons from ancient generals and modern strategists alike. Where his classmates sought popularity or comfort, Napoleon sought mastery and control. Even as a boy, he believed he was destined for greatness. Not because life had been kind to him, but because he believed struggle itself was shaping him for something larger. The French Revolution changed everything. The old aristocratic order collapsed almost overnight. Noble officers were executed, exiled, or fled France, leaving the army desperately short of experienced leadership. For the first time, advancement was no longer reserved for the privileged. Suddenly, talent mattered more than birth, and Napoleon seized the moment. In his early 20s, he distinguished himself as an artillery officer, displaying an unusual ability to see the battlefield as a whole. He moved forces quickly, struck decisively, and exploited enemy weaknesses without hesitation. His true breakthrough came during the Italian campaigns of the 1790s. Facing larger and better-funded Austrian armies, Napoleon used speed, surprise, and psychological warfare to shatter his opponents. He attacked when they expected defense, maneuvered where they thought terrain made movement impossible, and turned small victories into crushing defeats. Europe was stunned. At just 24 years old, Napoleon had become a national hero, admired by soldiers, feared by enemies, and increasingly aware of his own growing power. By 1799, France was exhausted. Years of revolution, war, and political instability had left the country deeply divided. The government was weak, corrupt, and widely disliked. Order was desperately needed. Napoleon returned from a failed campaign in Egypt and sensed his moment. With careful planning and political backing, he staged a swift coup d'état. The government fell with surprisingly little resistance, and Napoleon emerged as first consul, the most powerful man in France. Unlike the revolutionaries before him, Napoleon offered something the people craved: stability. He stabilized the economy, reformed education, reorganized the military, rebuilt roads and bridges, and restored a sense of national pride. France began to function again. Then, in 1804, he made his boldest move yet. In a lavish ceremony attended by the Pope himself, Napoleon crowned himself emperor, placing the crown on his own head. The message was unmistakable. His authority did not come from tradition, religion, or revolution. It came from himself. Napoleon's empire expanded at breathtaking speed. Coalition after coalition rose against him: Austria, Prussia, Russia, and others, and coalition after coalition fell. Napoleon's armies moved faster, coordinated better, and struck harder than anything Europe had seen before. He redrew the political map of Europe, dissolving ancient states and installing allies and family members as rulers across the continent. Loyalty, not legitimacy, became the foundation of power. At home, Napoleon introduced the Napoleonic Code, a sweeping legal reform that emphasized equality before the law, property rights, and secular governance. Many of these principles still shape modern legal systems today. At its height, Napoleon controlled most of continental Europe, but his empire was built on constant war, and war demanded endless victories. Each triumph raised expectations higher, leaving no room for pause or restraint. Napoleon could not stop, and more dangerously, he believed he did not need to. In 1812, Napoleon made the decision that would change everything. Determined to force Russia into submission, he assembled the largest army Europe had ever seen, more than 600,000 soldiers from across his empire, and marched east. At first, resistance was minimal, but the Russian army retreated again and again, refusing to fight decisive battles. As they withdrew, they burned villages, crops, and supply depots behind them, leaving Napoleon's army stretched and starving. Napoleon eventually captured Moscow, the symbolic heart of Russia, but the city was empty, and it was burning. Winter arrived earlier than expected. Starvation, disease, and relentless attacks from Russian forces destroyed the Grand Army. Horses collapsed, soldiers froze, discipline dissolved. By the time the survivors staggered back across Europe, fewer than 100,000 remained. The myth of Napoleon's invincibility was shattered forever. In 1814, Napoleon was defeated and forced to abdicate. He was exiled to the small island of Elba, a symbolic prison meant to keep him far from power, yet close enough to monitor. Europe believed the nightmare was over. They were wrong. Less than a year later, Napoleon escaped. As he marched back into France, soldiers sent to arrest him instead joined his cause. Towns opened their gates. Support returned almost instantly. Without firing a single shot, Napoleon reclaimed power in what became known as the 100 Days. But the world had changed. In 1815, at the Battle of Waterloo, British and Prussian forces finally defeated him. This time, there were no mistakes, no escapes, no second chances. Napoleon was exiled to the remote island of St. Helena, thousands of miles from Europe and any hope of return. Napoleon died in 1821, at the age of 51. Officially, the cause was stomach cancer, though rumors of poisoning persist to this day. Even in defeat, his legacy endured. His military strategies are still studied in academies worldwide. His legal reforms reshaped Europe. His rise and fall became the blueprint for countless leaders who followed. Napoleon proved that one man, armed with ambition and intellect, could reshape an entire continent. But he also proved that no one, no matter how powerful, can conquer the world forever. Napoleon Bonaparte's story is more than history. It is a warning about unchecked ambition, a lesson about the price of power, and a reminder that even the greatest empires can collapse in a single winter. If you want more true stories about the people who shaped our world, subscribe to History Scribe.